Knox Hallett served his wife divorce papers inside the Hallett family study, not in a lawyer's office, not after a real conversation, but in the room where his grandfather's portrait still hung above the fireplace, and Ariel Pemberton was already sitting close enough to hear every word. Sage Caldwell Hallett, 36-year-old wife of Knox, and the woman who had spent the last 3 years quietly learning the bones of a company her husband barely understood, stood near the bookshelf with her coat still buttoned, because no one had asked her to stay long enough to take it off. Knox Hallett, 41-year-old heir and acting CEO of Hallett Brothers Construction, held a sealed envelope in one hand and avoided her eyes. Dorinda Hallett, 64-year-old mother of Knox, and the woman who had treated the Hallett name like a deed she personally owned, sat in the wingback chair nearest to Knox, as if proximity made her the decision-maker. Ariel Pemberton, 30-year-old daughter of Victor Pemberton, and the polished young woman Dorinda had been deliberately placing beside Knox for the last 4 months, did not look surprised. That was the detail that told Sage everything. Knox opened the envelope and said, "I think you already know what this is." Sage looked at him for a long moment. "Tell me anyway." "It's not working, Sage. We both know it." Dorinda folded her hands in her lap. "This is the right decision for the family, for the company. A man in Knox's position needs a partner who understands the world he operates in." Sage looked at Ariel. "Is that what you are, a partner?" Ariel smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who had learned how to make hostility sound like manners. "I'm just here for support." Sage looked back at Knox. "You didn't have the courage to do this alone." Knox's jaw tightened. "Mother is right. We've been going in different directions for a long time." That was the moment Sage understood. Knox had not made this decision. He had been walked into it the same way he had been walked into every other major decision of his adult life, step by step, with Dorinda holding the map. She took the envelope from his hand. She did not sign anything. She did not scream. She only said, "I'll have my attorney review this," and walked out through the front door of a house where she had cooked meals, absorbed insults, and quietly held together a company from the inside. A company Knox did not know she was also in the process of saving from the outside. Because Knox Hallett did not know that Sage was the controlling beneficial owner of Stonemark Capital, the private investment firm currently in final acquisition, talks to purchase and stabilize Hallett Brothers Construction through the Forrest Caldwell Trust, named after her late father. He thought the divorce made him free. It only removed the last person who had been protecting him. If you believe the person who stayed loyal should never be confused with someone who has nothing to lose, comment justice right now. And stay with this story until the end, because the woman they dismissed on a Tuesday walked into the boardroom on a Thursday and changed every name on the paperwork. Subscribe to Broken Oath Tales before we begin. 3 weeks before Knox handed her that envelope, Sage was standing on the Crestview Bridge project site at 6 in the morning with a hard hat and a clipboard that didn't belong to any official department. The Crestview Bridge was the largest municipal infrastructure contract Hallett Brothers had won in 11 years. It was also, according to the confidential due diligence report Sage had read at midnight through her Stonemark Capital channels, the contract most likely to collapse the company if the foundation rework on the East Anchor wasn't addressed within 60 days. Ruth Colby, 59-year-old senior project manager at Hallett Brothers and one of the few people on any job site who still cared more about the work than the optics, met Sage near the equipment bay with a thermos of coffee and the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for this particular conversation. "The anchor survey came back," Ruth said. "East side is showing stress fractures in the secondary piling. If we pour the deck before we address that, we're not just behind schedule, we're liable." Sage already knew. She had seen a redacted version of the same report, filtered through 3 layers of Hallett's project management bureaucracy, in Stonemark's acquisition binders. Seeing it raw, in Ruth's hands, on a cold morning with the site still quiet, made it feel different, more real, more urgent. "Does Knox know?" Ruth gave a short, humorless laugh. "I put it in his Monday briefing. He told me to hold off raising it publicly until after the investor lunch." Sage kept her face still. "Who's coming to the investor lunch?" "Victor Pemberton and his daughter." She drove to Knox's office before 8. His assistant waved her through. Inside, Knox was already on his second coffee and his third phone call. He held up one finger when he saw Sage, finished the call, and exhaled the way men exhale when they want to signal that the weight of the world is heavier on their shoulders than anyone around them can possibly appreciate. "I've seen the East Anchor report," Sage said. "It's being managed." "Ruth doesn't think so." Knox set down his cup. Ruth is cautious, that's her job. My job is to keep the company moving forward. Your job is to make sure the bridge doesn't fail. He gave her the look she had come to know over 3 years, not quite dismissal, but something just adjacent to it. The look of a man who has decided that a concern voiced by his wife is automatically a size smaller than a concern voiced by anyone else in the room. I have it handled, Sage. Under a folder near the edge of his desk, she could see the corner of a document stamped Crestline Group, preliminary bridge financing terms. She did not let her eyes rest there long enough for him to notice. Who is Victor Pemberton? She asked. Ariel's father. He runs Crestline Group, bridge financing, project rescue packages. He's coming to talk about stabilizing our cash position while Crestview gets back on track. Knox paused. And before you say anything, this is a conversation, not a crisis. Sage said nothing else that morning. She left and called Emil Strand, 49-year-old attorney, and the only person outside her private board who knew that Sage Caldwell Hallett and the controlling owner of Stonemark Capital were the same woman. How close is Crestline to submitting a formal proposal? She asked. Emil was quiet for a beat. They sent a preliminary interest letter to Hallett's outside counsel last week. Sage, the terms are not a rescue package, they're a capture mechanism. If Hallett misses one payment date, Crestline can demand first lien on equipment, active contracts, and the goodwill associated with the Hallett name. Has Knox read the full terms? Based on what I'm seeing, no. Sage sat in her parked car in the construction site, lot watching Ruth below point something out to a foreman who looked too young to understand what he was looking at. How long before Stonemark's offer goes to the independent committee? She asked. 10 days. Keep it on schedule, a pause, and begin a preliminary look at Crestline's history, other companies, other deals. I want to know if this is their first time. You think it goes beyond opportunism? I think Victor Pemberton's daughter has been having dinner with my husband twice a week for 4 months, Sage said. I don't think that's a coincidence. The investor lunch was held in the Hallett family dining room. Not the office, not a restaurant. Dorinda had arranged it in the house deliberately. The room where Knox's father had made decisions for 30 years, the room designed to signal permanence and family weight. Victor Pemberton, 57-year-old head of Crestline Group, sat across from Knox with a leather portfolio and the composed expression of a man who had done this particular dance many times before. Ariel sat beside her father. Her silk blouse was pressed, her posture easy, her eyes moving around the room the way the eyes of someone move when they are quietly taking inventory. Sage was seated at the far end of the table. Dorinda had arranged the seating. Dorinda smiled at Sage across the tablecloth, the way people smile when they have already made a decision and are simply waiting for the other party to understand it. Victor opened the portfolio. What Crestline is proposing is a bridge loan to stabilize cash flow while the Crestview contract gets back on track. Fast capital, minimal friction. You keep operate, we take a modest security position in exchange. Knox leaned forward, hungry in the way men get hungry when any answer presents itself that doesn't require admitting failure. What kind of security position? Standard lender protection, first lien on active equipment, priority position on contract receivables in the event of default. Sage looked at the document Victor slid toward Knox. The default threshold was 30 days. She had seen that in Emil's summary. She also saw that Knox was reading too fast, his eyes moving across the compound clauses without slowing at the places that mattered. That's not standard, she said. Knox looked up. Most bridge financing for construction carries a 90-day default window, she said, and this clause gives Crestline operational approval authority over any new contract execution above $50,000, the moment Hallett misses a single monthly payment. Victor's expression cooled by exactly 1 degree. That clause protects our position during the lending period. It gives you operational control the moment Knox has one difficult month. That's not protection. That's a trigger. Ariel tilted her head. I think Sage might be confusing caution with obstruction. She said it sweetly, the particular sweetness of someone who has learned to wound without leaving evidence. Knox said, Sage, Victor is offering to help. Victor is offering to position himself before Crestview closes. There's a difference. Dorinda set down her glass. Knox, perhaps this conversation would be more productive with a smaller group. Mother's right, Knox said without meeting Sage's eyes. Sage, we can go over this later. Later never came. That evening she heard him through the half-closed study door. His voice was low, careful. No, he said into the phone. She doesn't understand the full picture. By the time anything is finalized, it won't matter. A pause. Then you're right, I've waited too long. Sage stepped back from the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she walked to the kitchen, picked up her phone, and called Emil. Begin the full investigation into Crestline, she said. Her voice did not shake. The steadiness cost her something, but she kept the cost private. Felix Marsh, 43-year-old private investigator who worked with Emil on corporate conflict matters, had been awake since 4 when Sage arrived at Emil's office the morning after Knox served her. He laid his findings across the table in a straight line. 14 prior transactions. Crestline had touched 9 of them and now held partial or full operational control over everyone. The pattern was identical across all 9. A company under stress, a fast financing offer dressed in friendly language, a personal relationship introduced through family, and then a slow tightening that the original owners never fully recognized until it was too late. Victor Pemberton doesn't buy broken companies, Felix said. He waits for someone to invite him inside, then he changes the locks. Sage looked at the timeline of Ariel's appearances in Knox's calendar. The first lunch was scheduled 3 weeks after Crestline submitted its preliminary inquiry to Hallett's board. How did Dorinda connect with Victor in the first place? She asked. Felix pulled a printed email chain from the file. Dorinda reached out to Victor directly after the bank flagged Hallett's credit line. She gave him the company's internal debt summary, not estimates, actual figures, dates, supplier pressures, payroll exposure. Sage looked at the page. Dorinda had handed the company's most vulnerable numbers to the person who had been circling them. She thought she was solving a problem, Emil said. She handed strangers the floor plans of a burning building and called it help, Sage said. And she used Knox's fear to do it. She thought of Ruth on the job site in the early morning cold, pointing at cracks in concrete that Knox had told her to stay quiet about. She thought of the 42 workers on the Crestview contract whose paychecks were 2 weeks from being quietly deferred. While Knox was signing preliminary documents, he hadn't read carefully enough. This was no longer only about what happened to her marriage in that study. This was about what happened to those 42 people if she did nothing. I want the Crestline proposal rejected before Knox can formalize anything, she said. I want the Stonemark acquisition on the board's agenda before the end of the week. And the ownership disclosure goes to the independent committee first, before anyone else opens their packet. She went back to the Hallett house one final time on Wednesday afternoon with an empty box and 3 things to retrieve. Her father's old property survey map. Forrest Caldwell had framed it the year he bought his first distressed site and rebuilt it correctly from the foundation. A green wool coat from the hall closet, and a small brass compass her father had pressed into her hand the last month of his life and said, "This tells you where you are. You decide where you're going." Mabel, 56-year-old housekeeper, who had worked for the Hallett family for 19 years, met Sage at the door with the face of someone who had witnessed too much in that house and had never been given permission to say so. "Just," Sage said softly, when Mabel started to speak. "Please." She moved through the room slowly. The kitchen still smelled like the coffee she had made every morning for 3 years. In the study, she found the survey map and lifted it from the wall. In the top drawer of Knox's desk, tucked under a rubber band, was a stack of notes she had written him during his worst months. She unfolded one. "You are better at this than you believe. I'll be here when you're ready to come home." He had kept every one of them. She sat with that for a moment. Then she closed the drawer and left the notes where they were. Some things you carry with you when you go. Some things you leave exactly where the other person put them, so they have to be the one who decides what to do with them next. She was carrying the survey map to her car when headlights swept across the driveway. Knox's car, Dorinda's car behind it. A third car she recognized as Ariel's. Knox saw Sage first. His face moved through shock, then something she couldn't name, then the familiar retreat behind irritation. Ariel spoke before Knox did. "You still have a key." Not a question, an observation with a faint edge underneath. Sage held the key between 2 fingers and placed it on the front step. Dorinda looked at the survey map. "Taking things that don't belong to you?" "Taking things that were mine before I forgot myself here," Sage said. Knox flinched. Ariel slid her hand into his, small gesture, very visible. In the house where Sage had once been a wife, Ariel stood beside Knox like a woman who had already begun making decisions about the furniture. Sage looked at Knox. "Tomorrow is going to be a difficult day for a lot of people," she said. Dorinda laughed softly. "You always spoke in warnings no one asked for." Sage turned to Dorinda. When she spoke, her voice was even. "You spent years teaching your son to look down. He never noticed what was above him." She got in her car. She did not look back. Emile called before she reached the highway. Every board packet has been delivered. The ownership disclosure is at the top of each folder. The independent committee chair receives it before anyone else opens theirs. Good, Sage said. Let them open it in front of each other. Knox's prepared statement was still folded in his jacket pocket when he walked into the Hallett brothers' boardroom on Thursday morning. Dorinda had helped him draft it. It talked about the company's future, Victor Pemberton's partnership, a new chapter of leadership. He had practiced it twice in the car. He did not expect the room to already be full. He did not expect auditors. He did not expect 3 members of the independent committee he had never formally met. He did not expect the outside counsel seated beside the company's own attorney. He did not expect Ruth Colby sitting stiffly in her best blazer at the far end of the table, looking like someone who had been asked to witness something important and had shown up prepared to do exactly that. And he did not expect Sage. She walked in directly behind him, grey blazer, flat shoes, a single thin file folder. She walked to the table without hesitating and took the seat reserved for the controlling representative of the acquiring entity. Not near the wall, not in the spare chair someone had placed near the door, the seat at the table, the seat with her name and the packet in front of it. Knox's voice came out sharp. What is she doing here? The committee chair opened the sealed disclosure folder and read without looking up. Sage Caldwell Hallett is the controlling beneficial owner of Stonemark Capital, the company selected by this board's independent acquisition committee to purchase and stabilize Hallett Brothers construction, subject to final governance approval today. The room held absolutely still. Victor Pemberton's hand stopped moving on his portfolio. Ariel's expression fell so completely. It looked like something that had been held in place by effort and had simply run out of it. Dorinda gripped the armrest of her chair. Knox stared at Sage, and the memories assembled in his face one by one, visible, like a man reading a document he had looked at many times before and only now understanding what the words actually said. Sage asking about the East Anchor report. Sage flagging the Crestline default clause. Sage reading the financing terms faster than his own attorneys had. Every moment he had heard his wife speak and registered only volume, not content. Every time he had said, "I have it handled," to a woman who already had the full picture. He started. "Before you thank your investors," Sage said, "you should know who owns them." Emile laid 5 documents on the table in sequence. The committee chair read each one aloud. Victor Pemberton's pattern of predatory acquisition across 14 prior transactions. Dorinda Hallett's unauthorized disclosure of Hallett's internal financial data to Crestline before any formal process had opened. Ariel Pemberton's documented personal contact with Knox during active acquisition discussions, constituting an undisclosed conflict of interest. Knox's preliminary approval of Crestline terms without required board notification, and Crestline's attempt to influence vendor negotiations on Crestview before closing had occurred. Dorinda rose from her chair. "This is personal revenge." Sage looked at her calmly. "Personal revenge would have been easy," she said. "This is corporate governance." Victor gathered his portfolio and started to stand. "Crestline will withdraw pending." Crestline's proposal was rejected by the independent committee 40 minutes ago, Emile said. "Any further contact regarding this acquisition goes through outside counsel only." Victor sat back down. There was nothing left to perform. Ariel leaned toward Knox and said something fast and low. Knox didn't answer. He was looking at Sage. Ariel pulled back. She looked at her father. Victor was already on his phone, not meeting his daughter's eyes. When a plan collapses, everything built on top of it collapses with it, and loyalty built on access does not survive the moment the access disappears. Ariel left before the meeting formally closed. Victor followed 5 minutes after her. The committee chair continued. Knox Hallett was suspended from executive authority pending review. Dorinda Hallett was removed from any advisory role and barred from internal company access. Crestline's proposal was formally voided and entered into the corporate record. Ruth Colby was appointed interim operations lead for the transition period. Then Sage spoke directly, without looking at any document. "No worker on any active Hallett project will be laid off during the first stage of the acquisition. Payroll will be stabilized by Friday. The East Anchor repair on Crestview begins Monday morning." Across the room, Ruth pressed both hands together. She did not cheer. She closed her eyes for a moment, the way people close their eyes when they have been holding their breath for a very long time and have finally been given permission to stop. Knox came back into the boardroom after the hallway had emptied. Sage was speaking quietly with Ruth near the windows. He stopped a few feet away and waited until she looked up. Was any of it real? He asked. She looked at him without the armor of calm she had worn all morning, just her face honest and tired, and finished with pretending it didn't hurt. Yes, she said. That's what made it a tragedy. I didn't know, he said. You didn't ask. There's a difference. His throat moved. I'm sorry. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out her wedding ring. She had been carrying it since the night he handed her the envelope. She placed it on the boardroom table between them, quietly, the way you set down something you have been holding a long time and have finally decided to put down for good. I love the man who married me, she said. I don't know the man who needed his mother's permission to do it. She picked up a file folder. She walked toward the door. Through the long glass windows above the building's floor, she could see Ruth already on the phone, making calls, moving forward, doing the work that had always been the actual point of all of it. Sage stepped outside. The morning air was sharp and clean. She thought of her father standing inside the first property he had ever bought out of bankruptcy. Not because the name above the entrance mattered, but because the people working inside it deserved someone who believed they were worth saving. He had pointed to the workers, not the sign, and told her, fall in love with how people are treated inside a building, never with the name on the outside of it. She had carried that her whole life. She had carried it into a marriage, into a company, into a boardroom, into a cold parking lot on a Thursday morning. The Hallett brothers' name was still on the building behind her. It would survive. The bridge would be built correctly. The workers would keep their jobs. The people who had trusted that company with their livelihoods would be protected from the people who had been willing to gamble with them. She had made sure of all of it. And she had done it without once being asked. Somewhere in that building, Knox Hallett stood at the boardroom window and watched the woman he had been told had nothing cross the parking lot in flat shoes and a grey blazer, carrying a thin file folder and her father's compass, walking without looking back, not because she was cold, but because forward was the only direction she had ever needed. If you believe loyalty should never be mistaken for weakness, comment justice below. Subscribe to Broken Oath Tales, because every story here is for the person who stayed, worked in silence, and never once stopped being the most powerful person in the room.